So you'd expect, right, a convert to Orthodox Judaism to be obsessed with good and evil, and that was one of the things that got me into Judaism. I thought Dennis Prager is right. The most important thing in the world is distinguishing between good and evil. It's the most important decision that we human beings can make, is to choose what is good and to flee from that which is evil. When we look at the world, we should be constantly judging between good and evil. That there is a transcendent source of morality who has communicated his will to us through the Torah and the ongoing Torah tradition. And so we're able to look at the world and we're able to see that certain behaviors are good and certain behaviors are evil. And if you do a sufficient number of these behaviors, it can even be useful to generalize people as good and evil. You can generalize regimes as good and evil. You can see the world as a battle between the good guys and the bad guys. You can see wars as battles between the good guys and the bad guys. You can see yourself as battling between that which is good and that which is evil. Wow, the palm trees are coming down, man. They're coming down on my head. Oy vey, guys. Oy vey. Oy vey. Palm trees are coming down. The answer, my friend, is blowing in the breeze. The answer is blowing in the breeze. Wow. Excellent air quality today because of these winds. So yesterday, sensitive groups were warned to stay outside. The air quality pollution index was something like 133. So, I mean, most of my friends don't pay any attention to that, but I chose to stay inside the whole day in part because the air quality pollution index was sensitive groups should stay inside. Like, why would I want to breathe that crap when I have a high-powered air purifier running in my room? But now the air is nice and clean thanks to this wind. But okay, so I was excited by this vision of good and evil, this clear delineation, and by Dennis Prager's point that the most important thing in the world is to become a good person. And Judaism is this step-by-step detailed system for making good people and thereby creating a good world. And I was like, yeah, this is obviously what's most important. What I most want in the world is for people to treat me well and to treat me good. And therefore, the most important thing for me is that I treat other people well. And there's a guidebook for what is good behavior. It's the Torah and the rabbinic tradition and Orthodox Judaism. And there's a community to monitor you and to inspire you. There's a tradition. There are rituals to train you. And yay! I've now got a cause to devote my life to. And it was tremendously energizing. And remember, at this time I was bedridden by chronic fatigue syndrome. It was energizing, it was inspiring. It could help me to get up in the morning and work through difficulties, with headaches and exhaustion. Now I've got moral clarity, right? What could be possibly better than moral clarity? The primary task for me today is to be a good person, to avoid gossip, to be honorable in all my behaviors. And that was a vision that inspired me for years. And then, of course, my own predilections with women kind of got me into a little bit of trouble, and the pleasure I derived from women was so intense. It met my needs in such a deep way that kind of put hooking up with hot women beyond good and evil. And then my life spiraled into chaos as a result of that. Oy vey. So here I am today, 52 years of age, and I absolutely believe in objective good and evil. And I believe that there is a transcendent source of morality, God. I believe that He's communicated His will to humanity through the Torah, so that we have a standard, a way of understanding the world, distinguishing right from wrong. okay? But on my live streams, I know that more than 90% of my audience is not Jewish, that like more than 95% of my audience does not share my faith statements that God is the source of right and wrong. God is the transcendent source of morality. So it's pretty easy and comfortable for me just to discuss things in terms of fact and logic and power, and rather than discussing things in terms of good and evil. So I feel comfortable discussing good and evil with people who share my faith statements, right? Because you need a leap of faith that there's a transcendent source of morality and that there is a standard by which to judge what is right and wrong. So unless you share that statement of faith, like, there's no discussion to be had, right? And it's silly to argue over faith. So I realized what Prager said, that only if you take the leap of faith to God and to divine revelation, then do you have an objective standard for good and evil. But to take that leap of faith, you're making a subjective leap. And I don't remember a lot from math, but I do remember if you multiply anything by 0, you get 0. So, yeah, if you take a leap of faith that God gave the Torah, you then have an objective standard for morality. But it's based on a leap of faith. So, look at that. Look at that, guys. Isn't that beautiful? So, unless someone's willing to share that leap of faith, then there's no discussion to be had, right? You can say, oh, I believe in objective good and evil. Unless people are willing to take that subjective leap of faith with you, you've got to figure out another way to talk to people. Also, I think we talk a lot about postmodernism, and I'm no expert on postmodernism, but this is my very elementary understanding of postmodernism. When I've run it by people who know about postmodernism, they say it's pretty good. That is that postmodern means that there's no one single system of thought. There's no one approach to life that's adequate anymore. That there's no one approach to life that will just get the job done. And so that's how I've evolved my stance, that I look to religion to answer religious questions. I look to biology to answer biological questions. I look to historians to answer history questions. I look to professors of physics to answer questions about physics. I look to specialists in Japan to answer questions about Japan. I look to nutritionists for expertise on nutrition. I look to, okay, there are all these different systems and they all have their place, right? And so I don't look to a rabbi for expertise on how much of a certain medication to take. That's the rabbi happens to also be a medical doctor. And I don't look to a professor of literature who can't read Hebrew for expertise on the meaning of various Torah verses. Like, it may be interesting to talk to him, but he's just dealing from the translation. Okay, I'm not going to listen to anyone seriously on the Bible in a deep way, like in a reverent way, unless they're fluent in the language of the Bible. Okay, unless they're fluent in Hebrew. And so it's part of this postmodernism that there's no one approach that will get the job done to navigate life. It's to recognize that different approaches have different gifts. So there are a lot of approaches looking at the world through these lenses, okay? These sunglasses are the lens of good and evil. I got these sunglasses when I converted to Orthodox Judaism. And whenever I put them on, I can see good and evil clearly, all right? I can see clearly now the rain is gone. I can see clearly now the pause is gone, because when I wear these sunglasses of Torah, I can distinguish as I look out into the world. It's like, oh, that's good, that's evil, that's shtus, that's foolishness, that's Bittul Torah, that's time taken from the study of Torah, that's kadosh, that's holy. Okay, these sunglasses give me the ability to spot good and evil. And there are many advantages to that. You just hear the word Nazi and you know, oh, that's evil, the Nazis are evil, you shouldn't talk to them. Anyone who expresses any sympathy for Hitler is an evil person, you should just avoid them. And there are a lot of advantages to this approach. You can bypass a lot of trouble if you take this approach. You're not going to blurt out the wrong thing at the Shabbat table when discussing World War II. You're not going to get out on alt-right demonstrations. You're probably not even going to go to the American Renaissance Conference. You're not going to get yourself stigmatized and fired, and you just got this very simple guide that people are obsessed with race, that's evil. We're all God's children, and what matters is good and evil, not black and white. So there are advantages to that approach to life, but there are also a lot of disadvantages, because it inhibits your ability to put yourself in other people's shoes. So Germany, because it's surrounded by enemies, has an incentive to try to win a quick war to take control of Europe. Right? It has the capability of winning a quick war and doesn't have naturally defendable borders. So even if Hitler wasn't running Germany in World War II, its leaders would face the exact same incentives to launch a massive war in Europe to try to take control of Europe. Because it's normal, natural, and healthy for people to want to survive and determine their own destiny. And Germany, surrounded by enemies from Poland to Soviet Union to Russia to France, and they had incentives to try to seize control. Their immediate surroundings, become a regional hegemon, to be the ruling power in Europe, akin to how the United States is the ruling power in the Americas. So the perspective I just outlined is just kind of the morality-free, realist approach to foreign policy. There are a lot of advantages to just taking the realist approach to foreign policy, that the success and failure of countries in conflict with each other it's not determined by morality. It's determined by power. It's determined by military force and economic force and geography and the balance of power, and which nations you can align with, and it's that essentially relations between nations very akin to relationships, say, between packs of gorillas in the wild, wherever gorillas hang out. And so I think there's a lot of wisdom to be gained from the realist perspective. The realist perspective, to extend realism of foreign policy to this realism in human relationships, is the understanding that different peoples have different gifts, have different, not just different understandings of the world, but just completely different experiences of the world, and that you shouldn't expect African Americans to behave like Japanese Americans, and you shouldn't expect Northern Europeans to behave like South Asians. So I kind of call that the realist perspective. And there are a lot of clashes between that evolutionary view of the world and the religious view of the world. Like, I find the more I study about evolution, the less my mind naturally inclines to look for answers to belief in God. And study of evolution and evolutionary psychology it just kind of shifts my thinking away from divine answers. It doesn't exclude divine answers. Okay, by no means did I become an atheist, but I kind of felt the tug towards naturalistic explanations. That particularly from doing these streams, I feel like half my audience are secular or atheist, and that we can all discuss naturalistic explanations for what's happening in the world, and that way we all have something that we can talk to each other about, rather than just having clashing faith statements. We can just talk in terms of power and evolution and group interests. Now the downfall of this naturalistic, realistic approach is that you'll seem like an atheist, you'll seem like someone with no morals, you're very likely to shock and offend, and if you don't have a good handle on reality, you can then just become infinitely morally flexible. You can just justify absolutely anything you want to do because you're just looking at the world in entirely naturalistic terms, like, oh, I have this urge, this is a basic, natural, healthy urge, and this person wants to satisfy her urges, and I'll satisfy my urges, and so we both win. Just a win-win situation. While the religious perspective is those urges should only be satisfied within marriage. And I know for myself, when I started satisfying my urges outside of marriage, that just took on a life of its own. Man, I was just off to the races and I couldn't handle it. So my life spun out of control without putting God first. So it's funny, I ended up in 12-step programs, often meeting in the basements of Protestant churches. I'm back in these Protestant churches, and they're in their libraries or basements or rec rooms, and thinking, how the heck did I end up back in the church? I converted to Orthodox Judaism to get away from all this, but I just got realist and natural in just kind of satisfying my basic instincts, and like we're all animals, we're all evolved to do certain things. My life spun out of control. I really needed to get the transcendent back in my life, and in a way that just wasn't religious rhetoric and religious prayer and religious teachings, but I needed the experience of other people in the 12-step rooms. I needed to go experiential about God, but just God as philosophy, God as theology, God as dogma just wasn't cutting it for me. So I tried religion to build out my worldview, and I found that didn't cut it, and I got into evolutionary psychology and got a lot of insights from that, but found that my own basic instincts were completely out of whack. I needed to basically reprogram my responses to stimuli, and I thought I'd give the God-based 12-step thing a go. How about God as Father, Abba? Yeah, I'm still struggling with that. So I'm still struggling to develop a relationship with God, to make God real in my life, to like connect to that divine source. And my sponsor wants me to begin each day by getting on my knees and saying thank you, saying please help me, God, guide me in your paths. End each day by getting on my knees saying thank you, which is fairly similar to how I was raised as a Seventh-day Adventist Christian, which is sort of embarrassing after this long, dramatic, frequently played out in public journey I've taken, converting to Orthodox Judaism. Now I'm back to doing many of the things that were suggested to me as a good Seventh-day Adventist preacher's kid. Oy vey, guys.